He was born into a world where the physical and spiritual were never separate, a world where breath carried memory and silence carried messages, a world where the rivers whispered names and the mountains held stories older than fire. Long before he learned to walk, there were elders who looked at him with a knowing expression, as if they recognized something in him that he had not yet discovered. His grandmother, who wore beads older than most people in the village, would watch him sleep with a soft, heavy knowing in her eyes. She would tell his mother, "This one, he came carrying people with him." And though his mother smiled without fully understanding, there was something different about the child, something ancient, something steady, something that made even the air around him feel attentive. When other children played in the dust without a care, he would pause and stare at the empty spaces between trees as though he could see footsteps no one else could. His senses were sharp, not in the way of the body, but in the way of the spirit. He felt shifts in the wind the way others felt a tap on the shoulder. He sensed presences the way others sensed heat. Even before he could speak in full sentences, he would point into thin air, following something only he could perceive. His grandmother, a woman who never rushed her words, simply nodded each time and whispered, "Yes, he hears them." But as he grew older, he learned that not everyone celebrated a child who saw what others refused to acknowledge. His father, who had grown up under the shadow of mission schooling and colonial teachings, believed the old ways were backward. He believed the ancestors were stories meant to be buried. And because he feared what he didn't understand, he often scolded the boy whenever he displayed his sensitivity. "Stop staring at nothing. There is nothing there," he would snap. But the boy knew better. He felt things. He felt people. He felt presences moving around him like wind with intention. He would wake at night to whispers, not frightening, but familiar, like voices calling from across a river. Sometimes he would hear drums when the world was silent. Sometimes he would dream of faces he had never met, faces painted with ash and ochre, faces lined with wisdom and sorrow. They would speak to him in a language that lived in his bones, a language he felt more than understood. And yet, without guidance, he grew afraid of himself. His gift became a burden he didn't know how to carry. His grandmother was the only one who saw the truth, but even she knew that callings could not be forced. They revealed themselves when the time was right. But then something shifted. When he was around 7 years old, he fell mysteriously ill. Doctors found nothing wrong. His body weakened, but his eyes grew sharper, as if he were seeing two worlds at the same time. His grandmother knew exactly what was happening, but his father refused to listen. She prepared herbs, burned him pefo, placed beads under his pillow, but his father threw them out, saying they were superstition. Yet every night the boy dreamt of the same woman, tall, wrapped in animal skins, her face painted in white clay, holding a staff carved with symbols that pulsed like heartbeat. She never spoke, but her presence wrapped around him like protection. One night, she reached out and touched his forehead, and when he woke up, he was breathing easier. From that day on, his grandmother spoke to him quietly, telling him stories of the old world, the world before churches replaced shrines, before books replaced bones, before colonizers named their spirits superior and declared African spirits demons. She told him of Sangoma, the healers who carried the voices of the ancestors, who saw beyond what the eyes could perceive, who guided families, saved lives, and connected the living with the departed. She told him of the calling, Ubizo, a force that did not ask for permission and did not care about fear, a calling that could break a person before it built them, a calling that chose people long before they chose it. She told him, "If the ancestors want you, they will keep coming." But children do not always understand destiny. He wanted to be normal. He wanted to silence the dreams. He wanted to run from the shadows that followed him in broad daylight. He tried to blend in, burying every instinct that made him stand out. But the calling does not fade. It follows patiently, persistently, until one can no longer hide. Years passed, and he became a young man torn between two identities. The world outside encouraged him to adopt modern ways, to view ancestral practices as primitive, to trust foreign religions over the ones born of his soil. But each time he tried to fit into the mold carved by colonizers, something inside him broke a little more. He felt restless in places others found peaceful. He felt incomplete in routines others found normal. He carried an invisible weight that only grew heavier with time. And the dreams returned stronger than before. The woman with the white-painted face appeared more frequently, now speaking in fragments he could nearly understand. He would wake sweating, heart racing, not from fear but from recognition. At times he heard bones rattling when he walked past certain trees. Sometimes he smelled smoke where there was none. Once, while walking home alone, he clearly heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, no one was there. Yet he felt someone standing inches away. That night he fell into a deep trance-like sleep and saw himself standing before a river with no end. On the other side were figures, some he recognized from old family photos, others he had never seen before. They called his name, not loudly, not urgently, but with a steady familiarity that pierced through his soul. And for the first time in his life, he understood they were waiting for him. The next morning, he told no one. Not his father, not his friends. Only his grandmother, who listened with calm eyes. When he finished speaking, she simply nodded and said, "It is time." She prepared a ritual to seek clarity. She burned impefo, laid down bones, placed water in a calabash, and sat in stillness. When she opened her eyes, she told him what she already knew but waited for confirmation. They have chosen you. They have chosen you strongly. You cannot run anymore. But accepting a calling is not easy. It requires sacrifice of comfort, identity, fear, and sometimes relationships. His father reacted with anger. "No son of mine will become a Sangoma," he shouted, insisting that such paths were backward and demonic. He threatened to disown him. He blamed the grandmother. He blamed tradition. And for a moment, the young man doubted himself again. But the ancestors have a way of removing confusion. Soon after, his father fell ill, not fatally, but humblingly. Doctors found nothing wrong. The grandmother recognized the message immediately. "The ancestors are speaking," she said. "They are correcting what must be corrected." Slowly, painfully, his father saw what he had never allowed himself to believe. And with heavy reluctance, he stepped aside, finally accepting that destiny cannot be policed by fear. The young man began Ukathwasa, the initiation journey. It was not glamorous. It was not easy. It was not romantic. It was a breaking before becoming, a stripping before discovering, a descent before rising. Every day he woke before sunrise, learning songs, rhythms, rituals, meanings behind beads, interpretations of dreams, cleansing practices, the language of bones, the reading of smoke, and the way spirits communicate through breath, sensation, and intuition. His dreams became clearer. The woman with the staff was no longer a distant presence. She became a guide, a mentor from another realm. Sometimes she appeared at the foot of his bed, sometimes in reflection, sometimes in silence behind him. He felt her energy in his spine, in his heartbeat, in the base of his skull. During rituals, elder Sangomas confirmed her identity. She was one of his ancestral grandmothers, a powerful healer from generations past. She was not a ghost. She was lineage. She was purpose. She was the blueprint of the gift he inherited. His training took months, then years. Each stage was a test, not just of strength, but of humility, obedience, emotional discipline, and spiritual awareness. He learned to throw bones and interpret them with accuracy. He learned to listen to messages carried by wind, birds, and dreams. He learned the difference between spirit possession and guidance. He learned the power of song and breath. He learned cleansing rituals that healed people emotionally and physically. He felt the pain of others as if it were his own. He heard stories from the elders about the old days, when colonizers feared African spiritual healers because they could not be controlled by force. They feared the Sangomas because they were connected to something they could not conquer, the ancestors. Colonizers did not fear the weapons of Africans. They feared their spiritual defenses, their unity with unseen realms, their ability to see beyond deception. So they demonized the old ways. They burned shrines. They banned rituals. They criminalized healers. They introduced religions that declared African spirits evil. They rewrote the identity of entire nations. But the ancestors waited. They waited patiently, knowing that one day their descendants would awaken again. And this young man, he had been chosen to awaken forcibly. He completed his initiation stronger, wiser, transformed. When he emerged, the elders crowned him with beads and skins that carried the weight of many generations. People who had never met him began dreaming of him, signifying ancestral recognition. When he walked, animals paused. When he sang, the air responded. When he healed, he did not heal with his own power but with the hands of many behind him. His father, who once rejected him, came to him one day with heavy steps and eyes filled with apology. The young man placed his hand on his father's back, and for the first time his father felt the warmth of the ancestors he had spent his whole life denying. Through tears he whispered, "Now I understand. I was afraid because I forgot who we were." The young man did not judge him. Instead, he reminded him, "We do not follow the ancestors, they walk with us." As years passed, his gift became respected far beyond his village. People traveled long distances to seek guidance from him. Some came with grief, some with sickness, some with confusion, some with spiritual torment. He listened, breathed, prayed, sang, and let the ancestors speak through him. He reminded people that African spirituality was never about worshiping idols or fearing spirits. It was about connection, healing, lineage, memory, and balance. He taught that the ancestors were not dead. They were present, waiting, guiding. He taught that colonization did not erase African identity. It only buried it. And buried things can rise. He healed children who had the same sensitivity he once feared. He helped adults rediscover the strength of their bloodlines. He traveled across lands to reconnect people with their roots. He showed them that the African soul is not broken, is only quiet, waiting for someone brave enough to call it back. And in nights of deep silence, surrounded by nothing but stars and the breath of the earth, he would feel the presence of the woman with the staff, the one who had appeared in his dreams since childhood. She would stand beside him in spirit, whispering affirmations of the path he was walking. He finally understood. He was not chosen because he was special. He was chosen because he listened, because he felt, because he surrendered, and because the ancestors trusted him with what the world tried to bury. He knew now, with unshakable certainty, that the calling was not a burden. It was a return to truth, a return to identity, a return to the spiritual heartbeat of a land. He understood that being a healer did not make him better than others. It made him responsible for restoring balance, protecting sacred knowledge, and guiding those who were lost. And so he lived with purpose, with reverence, with unwavering devotion to the lineage that shaped him. He became a bridge between worlds, a voice for the silent, a reminder that Africa's spirit had never died. It had only waited for someone brave enough to remember. And he, the child who once feared his own visions, had grown into the very vessel his ancestors had seen long before he ever understood himself.